Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. President Donald Trump has laid out his financial plan for America. The $1.1 trillion spending plan slashes funding to several government departments while also putting down a down payment on plans for a border wall and increased military spending. It's all part of his plan to do more with less. But a lot of lawmakers up on Capitol Hill aren't having it. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is at the White House tonight with a look at some of the winners and losers in the president's budget. Good evening, John.
Bret, good evening to you. There are two words that the president's budget director used to describe the budget that released today. Mick Mulvaney saying this is all about hard power. In putting together the discretionary budget, OMB Director Mick Mulvaney said he listened to all the promises the president made during the campaign, then created a budget policy for each and every one.
We had America First, an America First candidate. You now have an America First president, and it shouldn't surprise anybody that we have an America First budget.
The first priority is to increase defense spending, at least a 10% bump, some $54 billion. Homeland Security gets an additional $3 billion, while Veterans Affairs will add $4.4 billion to its budget. $1.5 billion will be tapped to begin construction of the border wall, with $2.6 billion more coming next year. To offset the increases, the State Department faces a 28% cut. Most of the $10 billion being slashed will come from the foreign aid budget, which Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says is just fine with him. The Environmental Protection Agency will be cut 31% and lose more than 3,000 jobs. HHS will be scaled back nearly 18%, while housing and urban development will lose $6 billion, including community block grants that help fund the Meals on Wheels program.
We can't do that anymore. We can't spend money on programs just because they sound good and great. Meals on Wheels sounds great. Again, that's a state decision to fund that particular portion of it, to take the federal money and give it to the states and say, look, we want to give you money for programs that don't work. I can't defend that anymore.
While conservatives will applaud the increase in defense spending, cuts to foreign aid, and elimination of programs like the National Endowment for the Arts and Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the new budget only holds the line on the deficit and does nothing to reduce it. In Congress, the Republican leadership reacted cautiously to this initial offer.
Do I think we can cut spending and get waste out of government? Absolutely. Where and how and what numbers? That's something we'll be figuring out as time goes on. This is just the very beginning of that process.
Democrats wasted no time calling it downright mean.
This budget is not a statement of values of anyone. That President Trump has shown that he does not value the future of our children and working families.
The OMB director said that this budget should come as a surprise to no one who listened to anything that the president had to say on the campaign trail. What might surprise the president, though, is how difficult it proves to be to get the budget you want through the Congress you need. Bret?
All right, John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thank you. We should point out that we are awaiting live remarks from President Trump at a reception there at the White House in the East Room. And they are the annual St. Patrick's Day reception for Irish Americans. And when he steps to the microphones, we'll bring that to you here. When it comes to money matters, most of us understand the importance of paying attention to the bills. So with a national debt on the rise and a debt ceiling deadline that's come and gone, why does it seem that elected leaders are dragging their feet when it comes to dealing with the debt? Tonight, a look at why it matters in this two-part series, Debt Rising. The debt clock keeps ticking, each second moving closer to a total national debt of $20 trillion with a T. That comes out to about $61,000 of debt for every American citizen. Those seem like scary numbers, so you might think lawmakers would be scrambling to deal with the next fiscal cliff, raising the debt ceiling. Past crises have led to partial government shutdowns, yet congressional leaders and administration officials are downplaying any immediate concern this time.
But we will deal with it certainly before the August recess. As to the other issue you mentioned about the government shutdowns, no one desires that. We're a long way away from that.
So what is it? The debt limit, or debt ceiling, is the congressionally imposed amount the U.S. Treasury can borrow to pay the government's bills. Raising that borrowing power to avoid financial default allows continued spending on things like Social Security and Medicare benefits, tax refunds, military salaries, along with interest on the national debt and other obligations. Ceiling is a misleading word of sorts. It implies a stopping point. But when it comes to the public debt, the sky's the limit. Nearly a quarter century ago, when President Clinton took office, the outstanding debt was about $4 trillion. A purring economy, budget cuts helped keep it in check, but began climbing again under President Bush. And when he left office in 2009, it was about $12 trillion. It only accelerated under President Obama, now approaching $20 trillion, showing little sign of slowing under the new chief executive. Through government shutdowns, S&P downgrades, sequesters, and even suspension of the debt ceiling itself by Congress over the past 2 years, the self-inflicted wounds have turned the debt ceiling argument into a political piñata. The first thing to remember about our shared debt is we always have had one. In 1790, at the birth of our republic, it was $75 million, mostly war debts and the initial inability of Congress to tax. The debt is not just a bunch of numbers viewed in isolation. It's now a political tool that lawmakers willingly use as a bargaining chip, tied to budget priorities. Fiscal policy, like spending and tax cuts, can help drive the economy out of recession, and increased military funding can respond to national emergencies, like the 9/11 terror attacks. So flexibility is built into debt ceiling increases and has been used 22 times in the past 23 years.
It's become a political football. So what happens is, instead of using the debt ceiling as a reminder or a nudge to get us back onto a smart and sustainable fiscal path, lawmakers end up holding it hostage, and it becomes politicized.
Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin warned Congress last week his department will have to take, quote, extraordinary measures to avoid default on the federal government's obligations. Treasury won't have issues paying its creditors until late summer. Short-term accounting flexibility would eliminate an immediate collapse. But prolonged delays could hurt the U.S. credit rating and further increase deficit costs into the billions.
It seems like the legislative priorities are not so much about let's fix the debt, let's fix the deficit, let's control this growth and spending, but really just to continue the spending, to continue, to add to the debt and deficit.
If our creditors ever lose confidence in our ability to pay back our debt, interest rates could shoot up dramatically.
That would be disastrous for anybody who has ordinary kinds of debt, mortgage, car debt, consumer loans, and for businesses that want to invest. It could precipitate another recession.
Now it's up to congressional leadership to determine when, not if, the debt ceiling will be raised.
Of course we'll do that. The government is not going to default. We'll do it. In what context, I wouldn't predict at this point.
Tomorrow, our series on the debt ceiling dilemma focuses on the financial consequences for your wallet and what solutions, if any, are coming from your elected representatives to tackle this ever-expanding issue. You're looking live at the White House. Vice President Pence making remarks ahead of President Trump at the annual St. Patrick's Day reception at the White House for Irish Americans. His grandfather, by the way, Vice President Pence, immigrated to America from Ireland. The Taoiseach is Enda Kenny. He's essentially the Prime Minister of Ireland. Let's listen into this event.
President of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor. Taoiseach, Mrs. Kenny, Ambassador Anderson, Dr. Lowe, Vice President Pence, and distinguished guests, we gather here today in the White House to take part in the traditional Shamrock ceremony and to celebrate the strong ties between the United States and a truly great country, Ireland. I also want to extend a special welcome to a group of distinguished local, political, and society leaders, and they are real leaders, who are with us from Northern Ireland, great people, including the Mayor of Belfast, and the head of Northern Ireland Civil Service. It's a lot of power there. Lord Mayor Kingston and Sir Malcolm McKibben. And it's wonderful to have you. Where are you, folks? Where are you? Where are you? Thank you. Thank you. And they're going to be having a great Open Championship very soon. I know that, right? At a great course. At a great, great course. St. Patrick's Day has become a truly important occasion in the United States, one embraced by Americans of all faiths and of all backgrounds. I've been to many of them, and we love it. The Shamrock Ceremony is a tradition that symbolizes the bond between our two countries. It dates back to 1952, when the Irish ambassador to the United States, John Joseph Hearn, sent a box of shamrocks to a president who did a very good job, Harry S. Truman. Our strong ties go back throughout American history. Irish Americans played a vital role in preserving our union during its hour of greatest need. So true. They played a very, very big role. Many distinguished themselves in the American Civil War with their grit and their bravery and their courage, earning the nickname the Fighting Irish. And I know a lot about the Irish. They fight. They are tough. I know a lot. I know more than I'm ever going to tell you. And when American armed forces joined the fight in Europe during World War II, 75 years ago, our heroic troops first stepped off ships in Belfast Harbor in Northern Ireland. Throughout the centuries, hardworking Irish Americans contributed mightily to America's innovation and to America's prosperity. They often overcame great hardship. It's really, I mean, it's like the hardship they overcame for us, for our people, is inspiring and really helped a relatively young nation beyond what anyone really understands or knows. So we want to thank you. It's just an amazing history. President John F. Kennedy, in an address to the Irish Parliament, said that it is that quality of the Irish, that remarkable combination of hope, confidence, and imagination that is needed more than ever today. Now, he said that a long time ago, but it's perhaps even more true today. The words of America's first Irish Catholic president ring just as true. We hope, confidence, and I tell you, what we want now is a lot of things, but we need that great Irish confidence. And they are confident people, aren't they, Mike? Huh? And I'll tell you what, we all want it together to grow in the 21st century. And grow we will. As I say, bigger and better and stronger than ever before. We must have the hope to believe in a better future, the confidence to pursue it, and the imagination to figure out how to get there. A new optimism is sweeping across our nation. You see that when you look at the numbers. The optimism is at the highest level in many, many years. And as America gains renewed strength, Ireland will find us to be an ever faithful partner and an always loyal friend. We will be there for you, and we will be there for you. So thank you for being here. I wish you a very, very happy St. Patrick's Day. And God bless you, and may God bless Ireland and Northern Ireland. Okay. And may God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
President Donald Trump at the White House with the Taoiseach and Kenny honoring St. Patrick's Day. A lot of Irish all over America, obviously, and many more tomorrow, officially St. Patrick's Day, as this event is an annual tradition. Now back to the news today. House and Senate leaders are saying there's no evidence that candidate Donald Trump was wiretapped leading up to the November election. The White House, meantime, is stepping up its defense of the president's tweets and what may be coming next. And there are new questions being raised in the Russia investigation itself. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has our report tonight.
The joint statement from the Republican Chairman Richard Burr and Ranking Democrat Mark Warner of the Senate Intelligence Committee went beyond the president's wiretapping claim. Quote, based on the information available to us, we see no indications that Trump Tower was the subject of surveillance by any element of the United States government, either before or after Election Day 2016. When pressed, the White House spokesman said the committee statement is not the final word.
The statement clearly says that at this time, that they don't believe that. They have yet to go through the information.
For 7 minutes, Spicer read through news reports about surveillance and then tried to turn the tables.
And where was your passion and where was your concern when they all said that there was no connection to Russia? Where was it then? You crickets from you guys.
The president took the same approach Wednesday night with Tucker Carlson.
I read in, I think it was January 20th, a New York Times article where they were talking about wiretapping. There was an article, I think they used that exact term. I read other things. I watched your friend Bret Baier the day previous where he was talking about certain very complex sets of things happening and wiretapping.
But a special report interview in early March with the House Speaker cited unconfirmed claims.
Right, but there's a report that June 2016, there's a FISA request by the Obama administration, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, to monitor communications involving Donald Trump and several other campaign officials. Have you heard that?
Well, again, and like I said, none of us in Congress or anybody that I know in Congress has been presented with evidence to the contrary of what you just said.
So you believe it to be true?
Yeah, that we have seen no evidence that anybody in this campaign or any other American was in on it with the Russians to meddle in our elections.
And last night, the president suggested new evidence will soon be available to congressional investigators.
We will be submitting certain things, and I will be perhaps speaking about this next week. But it's right now before the committee, and I think I want to leave it there.
While the wiretapping dispute intensifies, the former acting CIA director and Clinton loyalist told a Washington intelligence group another allegation is settled.
On the question of the Trump campaign conspiring with the Russians here, there's smoke, but there's no fire at all. There's no little campfire, there's no little candle, there's no spark, and there's a lot of people looking for it.
Morrell joins a growing chorus of former senior intelligence officials.
There was no evidence of that included in our report.
I understand that, but does it exist?
Not to my knowledge.
With the Friday deadline looming, the House Intelligence Committee wants the CIA, NSA, and FBI to explain who in the last administration identified or unmasked Americans whose phone calls were captured during foreign surveillance, and whether the names go beyond Mike Flynn, the former national security advisor.
I have been very clear about my concern about, number one, the incidental collection on General Flynn, how that was put into a product, how it was unmasked, how it was leaked to the public. Several crimes have been committed here.
Senior Democrat on the House Government Oversight Committee released new documents that show Flynn was paid more than $33,000 by a Kremlin-backed TV outlet to appear at a 2015 Moscow event where he sat with the Russian president. Flynn received another $23,000 from Russian businesses. The Democrats are calling for an investigation because they say the payments may violate a constitutional provision that bars gifts from foreign governments. Bret.
Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
More on this with the panel. Up next is the GOP healthcare plan on the ropes up on Capitol Hill. We'll have the latest from there. Stay tuned. The plan to dismantle Obamacare passed a key hurdle today, but just barely. And it still faces a tough sell as more lawmakers voice their opposition to it, even as the House Speaker promises to amend the plan to appease everyone. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel has a progress report tonight from Capitol Hill.
The ayes are 19 and the noes are 17.
The ayes have it and the motion is agreed to. The American Health Care Act of 2017 is ordered reported to the House of Representatives with a favorable recommendation.
The Republican health care plan has taken another step, passing the House Budget Committee, but it was close. Conservatives Dave Bret, Gary Palmer, and Mark Sanford joined with Democrats in voting no. House Speaker Paul Ryan is trying to bridge the gap between conservatives and moderates trying to pass this bill, and Ryan praised the help he's getting from President Trump.
He is making it easier and better for us to pass health care. The president, his involvement and his engagement, his listening and his negotiating skills are bringing people together so that we can pass a bill. So we have a bill that we can pass, get consensus on, and make good on our promises.
Ryan has also faced incoming fire from some Senate critics like Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz, and Rand Paul. The Speaker said his focus is on getting a bill that can pass the House, and the Senate will play its role.
They'll have every opportunity to make a change to this legislation because that's how legislation is written. House passes a bill, House amends a bill, sends it to the Senate, Senate brings up a bill, and then the Senate can amend a bill, and then we go to conference. That's the legislative process.
House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi suggested Ryan is willing to endanger his GOP members.
If it doesn't die in the House, this Speaker has asked his members to walk the plank on a very bad bill that has damaging consequences across the country that might not even become law.
Conservative Raul Labrador hit the Speaker from the right today saying, quote, maybe Paul Ryan needs to take a couple of lessons from Nancy Pelosi and learn what it means to have a majority, but having a majority does not mean playing defense, it means playing offense. In today's hearing, Democrats blasted the health care legislation.
This is not a health care bill. It is an ideological document, a fantasy about freedom and choice in a market that doesn't exist. But what is real about this bill is painfully real.
This plan is a scam being perpetrated on and against the American people. If you're 50 to 64 years old, you get clobbered.
Up next is the Rules Committee as Ryan and top administration officials try to find the right adjustments, what Ryan calls the sweet spot to pass this bill in the House. Bret?
Mike, thank you. President Trump's own words came back to haunt him as judges in both Hawaii and Maryland struck down the president's revised executive order, citing his own rhetoric. But as correspondent William Lajeunesse reports, the president says this fight is far from over.
And I will not stop fighting for the safety of you and your families, believe me. Not today, not ever.
A defiant Donald Trump doubled down last night in Nashville on the very reason a judge ruled against his second travel ban.
This is a watered-down version. And let me tell you something, I think we ought to go back to the first one and go all the way, which is what I wanted to do in the first place.
Judge Derek Watson, an Obama appointee, ruled that the secular purpose of the executive order, which was to limit immigration for national security reasons, was at the very least secondary to a religious objective of temporarily suspending the entry of Muslims.
That truly goes against the very essence of what makes Hawaii a very special place.
Most controversial about Watson's ruling, it was not based on what is in the executive order, but comments candidate Donald Trump made months ago.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Those comments haunted the administration not just in Hawaii, but Maryland as well, where the judge said direct statements of President Trump's animus towards Muslims present a convincing case the executive order was issued to accomplish his promised Muslim ban.
There are more partners in this fight, and the success speaks for itself.
15 states and now 8 federal judges have come out against the president's 2 executive orders. But not everyone agrees. Several legal experts say the rulings are political and ignore the broad powers given the president in immigration and foreign affairs.
Their job is to rule on what the law is, not what some judge wishes the law were or what he thinks Donald Trump said about the law. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump said about the law. What matters is, what is the law?
Now, the president said he's prepared to go to the Supreme Court, but he'll first have to go through the 4th and the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals, and that could be tough, considering all the judges so far have been unable to get past what they see as the ban's discriminatory effect to even consider the president's authority to order it. Bret?
William LaJeunesse live in Honolulu. William, thank you.
We are proposing a budget that will shrink the bloated federal bureaucracy. Our budget calls for one of the single largest increases in defense spending history in this country.
It throws billions of dollars at defense while ransacking America's investment in jobs, education, innovation, clean energy, and life-saving medical research.
He's been a godsend, as far as I'm concerned, for the men and women in uniform. He wants to rebuild the military.
I think this is going to be a wake-up call to a lot of people who supported Donald Trump. That his budget is betraying them.
More money for defense, more money for our vets, more money for border enforcement without adding to the deficit.
Well, some of the sights and sounds from Budget Day, that's what it's called, when the White House rolls out the budget. The budget this time looks like this for the departments that are adding and subtracting, and you can see the percentages here on this graphic. Defense up 10%, Homeland Security up 7%, Veterans Affairs up 6%, and there you see the cuts, the biggest being to the State Department at 28% cut and the EPA at 31%. What does this mean? And will it get through at these levels? Let's bring in our panel. Douglas Holtz-Egan, president of the American Action Forum and former CBO director. Eli Stokols, White House correspondent for Politico, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Doug, you've looked at a lot of budgets in your time. What about this one? What does it tell you, and does it level out?
It's not a budget. A budget has economic assumptions, it has tax policy, it has mandatory spending policy, or entitlements as people talk about them, and it has these discussions about the annual spending Congress votes on, defense and non-defense. So much of it is missing. It's a very narrow look at a tiny part of the budget, 30% of the budget. Everything else is outside of this.
I mean, we should point out this is the blueprint. They're going to fill in the blanks in May, they say.
Yeah, I'll come back to that.
Okay.
What did we learn? We learned that there's more money for defense. Oh, I think everyone knew that the Defense Department was badly underfunded and that we had readiness problems and we needed to do something about it. The real question was, how do you fit that into the big picture? What we saw here is, I think, the opening bid on some cuts to non-defense discretionary spending, but a lot of these have been tried before historically. They don't go through. So I don't think we really learned a ton about what we're going to get out of this administration.
And you say about May?
If they put a budget out in May, it'll be done right after Congress has finished its budget work for the year, which means it'll be irrelevant.
Okay. Eli, your thoughts on how the White House is pitching this? Mick Mulvaney was out in the briefing room today making his case.
Yeah, he said if you watched and listened to the president during the campaign, he's doing all the things he said he was going to do. The problem is he's making a lot of promises on the campaign trail that don't really add up when you do the math. I think you can look at this as sort of a political document. It's not going to go anywhere in Congress, but you can look at it as sort of a message of the president's priorities to his base. Defense, strong border, some signals. And if you get Democrats in the position of having to defend, the NEA and PBS funding, that's not a bad thing for Donald Trump. Although I think you look at Meals on Wheels, that's something that's getting a lot of attention. Cuts to a program that gives millions of seniors hot meals. I think there are some politically problematic things in this budget also. And I think I talked to somebody today, even a foreign policy defense hawk, a Republican on Capitol Hill, who said they're not even happy because they want more money for defense. They just think it's completely unrealistic. They say nobody's really happy in this budget. And, you're not going to really have a serious budget until you start to talk about entitlements, and they're trying to avoid doing that.
We should point out that President Obama's budget, I think, got one vote one time and did not get passed in its form as it was thrown up to Capitol Hill. Let me put this up for State Department, and that is real pushback from Capitol Hill on that number of roughly 30% cut.
We're not going along with a budget that undermines American leadership and puts American lives at risk. I've been in Congress nearly 30 years. I have never seen anything so reckless when it comes to State Department authorization.
The level of spending that the State Department has been undertaking in the past, and particularly in this past year, is simply not sustainable. We are going to construct a way forward that allows us to be much more effective, much more efficient, and be able to do a lot with fewer dollars.
The Secretary of State Tillerson in Asia saying he can get it done with those dollars.
Well, he won't have to, because this is a budget like every other one I've seen in the decades I've been here that is dead on arrival at Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill is a huge morgue of presidential budgets. There's not one that actually croaked into life. They all come in dead. They are wish lists. They are expressions of one's interest and a way to respond to promises. Now, the beginning of this, the premise of this, is defense. In the 8 years under Obama, we had a real destruction of the defense budget. Obama came in, it was about 4.6% of GDP. When he left, it was 3.2%. To put it in context, under the sainted John Kennedy, it was around 10%. We are at the lowest ebb since about Pearl Harbor, and you can see it in the readiness. So that had to be done. The problem with the budget is, as Doug indicated, all the real stuff where the money is, you know, the Willie Sutton bank money, is in entitlements, which isn't even in here. And the problem is it's not in here because we got a president who promised in the campaign, unlike just about every other Republican opponent, he wasn't going to touch a hair on the head of entitlements. So if you don't, it all has to come out of the domestic discretionary spending. And when you do that, you end up with these cuts which are never going to happen. And you get all the old perennials. Big Bird is going to get roasted again, or at least proposed to be, and it will, I guarantee you, he will or she will, I'm not sure which it is these days.
Well, we'll try to get an answer for you.
Is going to escape unscathed.
Okay, Doug?
I mean, budgets are dead on arrival, but they're usually complete statements of a philosophy. Obama's was real clear. Republicans rejected it entirely, and understandably, but you can't understand the philosophy here. One of the most troubling things is that all of this huffing and puffing is being done just to break even, and the federal budget's already on a completely unsustainable track. The debt's exploding, and there's nothing in there that says, what do I plan to do about it?
Yeah, but having talked to leaders on the Hill, you know, they see this health care bill, which is also obviously in trouble politically on votes, as a big entitlement reform that provides,
and it correctly is.
Provides breathing room for their tax reform, which they want to get through. And they also say that probably long-term entitlement reform is going to be tacked on, even though the president won't talk about the semantics.
Well, I think that's probably right. What the president has given them mechanically is enough to get started in the congressional budget process. You know, these are my requests for the agencies. They'll fill out the rest, and it'll include some entitlement reforms, whether it's in the Health Care Act for America or other places, and they want to get to tax reform. So a complete set of budgetary activities will take place, but a complete set of budgetary philosophy and the statement to the American people about where we're headed, that's what's missing.
All right, next up, settling one Russian allegations while others just will not go away.
First of all, he stands by it, but again, you're mischaracterizing what happened today. The bottom line is that the president said last night that he will be providing, that there would be additional information coming forward. There's a ton of media reports out there that indicate that something was going on during the 26th election.
I've been reading about things. I read in, I think it was January 20th, a New York Times article where they were talking about wiretapping. There was an article, I think they used that exact term. I read other things. I watched your friend Bret Baier the day previous, where he was talking about certain very complex sets of things happening and wiretapping.
I'll get to that in a second. Today, the Senate Intelligence Committee, both the chairman and the ranking member, actually they're both chairmen, actually, Burr and Warner, based on the information available to us, we see no indications that Trump Tower was the subject of surveillance by any element of the United States government, either before or after Election Day 2016. I have been referenced numerous times by the president and Sean Spicer for this question to Speaker Paul Ryan. There's a report that the June 2016, there's a FISA request by the Obama administration, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, to monitor communications involving Donald Trump and several other campaign officials. Then they get turned down, and then in October they renew it, and they do start a wiretap at Trump Tower with some computer and Russian banks, and it doesn't show up anything by reporting. Have you heard that?
None of us in Congress, or anybody that I know in Congress, has been presented with evidence to the contrary of what you just said.
So you believe it to be true?
Yeah, that we have seen no evidence that anybody in this campaign or any other American was in on it with the Russians to meddle in our elections. We know they meddled. Russia is an adversary, and that's something we have to work to counteract.
I got it. But my point is that the Obama administration was pretty aggressive. I have a couple of FISA requests.
No, I hear your point. But I'm saying, but I've seen nothing of that. I've seen nothing come of that. That's my point.
Okay, so here's how this all comes together. I'm getting ready for a pre-taped interview with the Speaker of the House. I'm going through what questions I'm going to ask. I see a Real Clear Politics write-up of a compilation of public reports that was put together by Mark Levin, the talk show host, radio talk show host, and it has very detailed references. So I'm thinking, well, I'm going to ask this to Speaker Ryan, and I'm probably going to cut it out because he's going to say, I don't know anything about that, and probably cut it out of the piece that we were going to air. Well, because Speaker Ryan answers the way he does, we leave it in, and that starts this whole thing when it comes to me. We're back with our panel. Eli, we watched the briefing today. They are saying that more is going to be released, but so far from Capitol Hill, we don't have any indication that anything happened.
And so far, everybody who has been asked about this, do you know of any evidence to support the president's claim in those tweets? They've all said, no, I do not. And I mean, let's go back to the briefing today. It started an hour late. What was Sean Spicer doing? It appears that he was back behind closed doors compiling a bunch of news reports that he essentially used to filibuster the press. He read these news reports that he claimed backed up the president's claims. None of them did, but he read them for about 8 minutes and then became very combative with the press corps as he asked these things. Trump last night in the interview with Tucker Carlson said, a couple weeks you'll see more things coming out. But when Donald Trump is on stage last night saying, I didn't mean air quotes, in interviews saying I put wiretap in quotes, I didn't really mean it literally, that's not usually the thing that you say if you're confident there are going to be things coming out to back up your claim.
All right, Charles, we should be clear the semantics here. One, we have no confirmation of the FISA requests. Two, we expect the FBI and the Justice Department to come forward with more. They did meet privately with senators. Three, we're not saying that there's no surveillance at all and that some people may have been swept up in what was going on dealing with Russian agents or Russians in general. The president tweeted about President Obama ordering the wiretaps on Trump Tower. And there's semantics here.
Well, first of all, I think you need to stop bringing together complex things because it leaves the president rather flummoxed. He obviously was. Look, everybody in town, except for possibly the president, knows that there wasn't a wiretap, that is simply not true. You've got the leaders of the two intelligence committees, Democrats and Republicans, saying there is no evidence. You have nobody in the administration itself who will support the story. They all say, well, we have to investigate. Look, I think they're way out on a limb. The president is just wasting time. At some point, they're going to have to admit this. You are right. It's not to say that it might not have been improper handling of information swept up when you were, let's say, wiretapping the Russian ambassador. But the idea that there was a wiretap on Trump Tower ordered by the Democrats, by the administration of Obama, there is simply no evidence, and everyone knows that.
I want to play this soundbite really quickly. Mike Morrell, former CIA director, about collusion.
On the question of the Trump campaign conspiring with the Russians here, there's smoke, but there's no fire at all. There's no little campfire, there's no little candle, there's no spark, and there's a lot of people looking for it.
And because we're dealing with all of this, that sometimes gets overlooked when people say that. Doug, I'd come to you, but I'm run out of time, and I didn't exclude you because you're the budget guy, I promise you. That's it for the panel. Up next, a major newspaper gets called out during today's White House briefing. Finally tonight, OMB Director Mick Mulvaney talking budget today at the White House briefing, taking questions from many different organizations. But when calling on the New York Times first, he told them they're in big trouble.
I call on the New York Times because they're in trouble. Apparently, is there where's my New York Times guy? Matt Flagenheimer and Ellen Rappaport, okay, are in big trouble. I'll give you the first question, but you have to deliver this message to them. They printed this morning that I'm the father of 17-year-old triplet girls. My 17-year-old daughter really wishes that we're happy, or really wishes that had happened, but my two 17-year-old sons are really upset. So if you could clarify that, that would be great.
Fake triplet news there. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. The first 100 days, hosted by Martha McCallum, is coming up in just a moment. We will also have the second part of our series on rising debt tomorrow on Special Report. You don't want to miss that. And heading into the weekend, of course, St. Patrick's Day. So top of the morning to you tomorrow. Martha McCallum.